Thank you.
Much, Maisam, for joining us and giving us this talk.
Well, thank you, Pua. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Perfect. Well, welcome everybody, and thank you for taking time out of your busy Sunday schedule, and we'll make this as non-formal and interactive as possible. And I'm very excited to see a kind of so much interest not only in pancreas as a field, but even in how to advance academically our thinking. Do you think if I advance my slides, they show up fully okay on your side?
Yeah, should be okay.
They're okay. Yeah. Okay. I'm just not able to make the participants square disappear, so I'm just going to scoot it to the corner.
Yeah, actually, we don't see your square at all, so it looks like...
you see my slide perfect?
Just your slides only, yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. So when we talk about how to present your research, and please feel free to interrupt and stop me at any time, why do we think it's important? So I thought about jotting down some of my main drivers of why I think it's important, and I'm definitely open to hearing from you guys. But in general, it shows academic productivity, and that is evident by papers. And another way to publish your work is really through abstracts. It does add to someone's So when you are building an academic or research portfolio, your reputation and maybe even expertise in a certain field becomes evident through the publications. And also, we have this obligation when we're funded, whether it's through our foundations or for education, like when CAPER did this investment in all these junior investigators, we really have kind of a responsibility to pay back. The best way to pay back is to add to the growth of knowledge to any field. Even when we apply to the NIH and we are successfully funded, we have the obligation to keep publishing what we worked on so that we can share the knowledge. Can you guys think of any other reasons of why it's important to get your work published? I take it that I covered all the points, maybe. So while we want to keep adding to the body of literature and adding to the wealth of knowledge in any field, we have to know that the medical science would consist to a large degree of discussion and exchange of experience and observations. While I might have observed something in my research, one of my colleagues might have observed something that is contradictory or different. They should publish it as well. And amongst disagreements between the scientists is where you can keep growing the level of evidence. And actually the best arguments are the scientific arguments. When you're at a meeting and somebody says, well, we found something different, or they add to the depth of someone's work by adding what they found. So the body of the literature could be expanded via direct dialogue amongst scientists, presentations at conferences, and by means of scientific manuscripts in peer-reviewed journals. I have to say though, if you had the chance to spend your time in publishing your work, and I know I highlighted a big word here, spend more time in polishing your paper rather than just writing abstracts. Because what I've observed, and it's a common problem in the academic field, people want to get abstracts, and sometimes it could be 500, 1,000 case series or a study. It does not make it to a paper. And that really, really makes me sad. What I've been carrying the mission or the torch off is really walking around posters and telling the fellows what is the best way to package their work into a paper. Abstracts are easier to get out than papers. My chair, our pediatric chair, Dr. Peggy Hofstadter, says that in every meeting, because papers add to the promotions of faculty from instructor to assistant professor to associate professor to full professor. And the number of papers and the quality of papers matter. She tells all of us, your abstracts are your paved way to hell. And in a way, I don't fully agree that it is, because that's one way to even get to a better paper. Really, you go to a meeting, you publish your data, whether it's completed or prelim. So I actually encourage abstracts. I don't want you to walk out of this presentation thinking I discourage abstracts. I always have abstracts at every meeting. But the thing that I'm trying to say is that don't put all your efforts in multiple abstracts on, kind of that project or common projects. Try to package every abstract to make it a publication. This is really the main point that I want to say. And I'm going to stop here and just kind of more or less want to open the door for you guys to hear if you have challenges on the general concept that I presented.
Hey, Maisam, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hey, this is Chris Moreau from University of Texas. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks so much for hosting. So I think one of the biggest challenges that we have is that sometimes we'll go back and we'll try to do a meaningful chart review. And in the process of doing that, we'll find some holes in our data. And so you're debating, do you want to put this out in a publication? Is it good enough for a paper? Some of the results may be numerically, statistically similar to other work, but you're still questioning yourself on, is it good enough? Do you have the rigor, even though your data set is not that great? So I'd just like to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, and that obviously, thank you for mentioning that question. That obviously is the role of the mentorship, where you want to, first of all, close in all the holes and put in all your plugs. Because what you are going to write, your data is your data. Once it's complete, I think, speaking of the abstract versus a paper, if you don't feel like it's complete, I wouldn't even put it in an abstract, because you may, by the time you plug in the rest of the holes and find that you cleaned up the data and whatnot, that your paper might look a little different. What I encourage my fellows to do, while retrospective chart review is really the start, especially in actually the pancreas world in general, but even in pediatric pancreatology, it's even less and less available evidence. So it's really a good starting point for a lot of questions. So while retrospective chart review might not be the complete study, we want to try to perfect it as much as we can. But at the same time, I encourage my fellows, if we're going to put something into an abstract, let's be as confident as possible that this is going to be the data that goes in the paper. And we actually say, if the abstract deadline is, June, and we're going to present this at Pancreas Fest, I'm just going to use that as an example, because, sometimes Pancreas Fest has 1 month prior of the meeting. I say, do we really think we can have the first draft of the paper ready at the same time to go hand in hand? What we find ourselves taking from the meeting by that time is that there's a lot of good reviews from our colleagues and peers who come and stop by the abstract, whether it's an oral or a poster presentation, and they give us some ideas and even points to add to, whether it's to the results or to the discussion. So in a way, use your abstract to make your paper better, but definitely have it be almost the exact data that you will put in a paper. But retrospective is retrospective. We all know that. Does that answer your question, Chris?
Yeah, it does. And I think, it's something that I know a lot of my colleagues struggle with as well on, you have data sets that go back 10 plus years, and some of the data, becomes sort of non-homogeneous in time. You'd love to track it all the way back, but if you didn't do it prospective, it gets to be a little bit challenging. But yeah, great answer. Thank you.
Absolutely. Anything else before we move to the next slide? Okay, so let's go here. So next question that comes up is choosing your journal. So tell you, this is not an easy topic. Obviously, we started by how do you pick your data set, and then abstract versus not. And I definitely encourage abstracts if they're going to make you get to your paper in a better way. Definitely don't take it away from the paper. And please, please, please take this as let's complete what we start. This is our devotion to the science. And it makes me sad when we have a lot of abstracts that don't make it to papers just because people got busy or moved the job or moved. It's okay. Even if you left a place or left a committee, you can polish your work and package it even after you leave. So now we say, okay, choose your journal. Prior to preparing your manuscript, you want to have downloaded and fully read the guide for authors for that journal, because they will describe to you the scope of the work that they're interested in. There will be detailed information about their interest. If it's a very much basic science oriented or cell or molecular biology, you're not going to obviously submit a clinical project. If it's very much geared toward pediatrics, you're not going to present an adult study. If it's more of a combined adult and pediatrics, it will be a higher impact in your field, but that's okay. You got to aim high. Then you look up specific information about the manuscript types and details and instructions on how you format your manuscript. I cannot tell you, I'm an associate editor for Pancreas, and I also am a reviewer for a lot of journals. And when there's nothing more, it doesn't reflect well on the author, although their data might be the best, when they have failed to look up the specifics of the journal. It doesn't leave a good impression on your editors and your reviewers if you have not formatted your references the way they want. If your abstract, if it says 250 words, then it has to be 250 words. These are the cosmetic, really not the content importance, but it's very, very much making your reviewer and editor's job easier, and it fits within the journal. So I would say take time after you have a full paper to kind of go over those step by step, including even the cover letter. They might want certain language and where the conflict of interest need to appear and all those kind of specifics. So I would say it's like a grant writing. If they say 3-page limit, then it's 3-page limit and so on. Any questions about choosing your journal? Okay, so how do we write it? We have now the topic, we have picked the data, whether it's retrospective, prospective, comparative effectiveness study, case series, whatever it is. You want to start by writing the introduction. The really main elements when we write the introduction are that you look up the relevant literature to your topic, and then look up what are the gaps in knowledge and really, in a way, why you did this study. And then I like to finish my introduction at the last paragraph to say, what is the main aim that I'm going to convey from this paper and the question that I will answer through this paper. If you cover these things in a succinct manner, your introduction is complete. You don't have to go off topic and make it a 2 or 3 page. Actually, the reviewers and the editors love that you cut the chase and just get into why you did the research, what are the gaps in knowledge, and then the main aim. Questions about the intro?
There's a question on the chat board about a journal selection.
Sure.
So this is coming from Livia. She's on the train and can't speak to us in the meeting, but she's concerning the choice of journal, choosing a journal that has already published something on the topic with also similar papers, or shall we pick a journal that has never published a paper similar to like your own research?
That's a great question. So it really depends. Having the journal published in a similar topic is sometimes very encouraging, okay? It depends. If it's a study, then it's always very encouraging. You know that you're within that scope. If it shows similar results, though, to previous papers on the topic, you got to highlight why is your paper different. And actually, you have to do it anyway, whether you submit it to that journal or another journal. I have to give you an example from our own, and it's easy to relate to because we know from, if it's like image of the month, and that's that's been my experience. There's a lot of journals that do that. Do not publish the same image of the month to the same journal. Does that make sense? Because they already published it. And if it's been, within the last 5 to 10 years, they're probably not going to say that this is novel, because it's really that one snapshot. But studies are always encouraged to be within the same scope. Any other questions in terms of the introduction or the journal choice? Okay. Materials and methods. Tell you in science, this is what we breathe, and this is where a lot of your peers' critiques are going to be. The two very important sections in any paper are this one, materials and method, and then the results. So why is it very important? It really shows that you get the credibility that you deserve to start in this section. And I would say just state it as it is. So if it's a retrospective, cross-sectional study from a prospectively collected cohort, just state it exactly as such. If it's a retrospective through billing codes, and that's how you found your case study, then I would state it exactly as such. And there's no perfect method. Your method is what you got to get to the work. So I would just state it as it is without over polishing that part. So this is the part that people want you to be very modest and just really state. If you have a study protocol, this is the place you would want to include it. All the details. You can actually copy and paste from your IRB because that's a study protocol. You had a study protocol before you did that. If the study involves human subjects, you want to put a statement about your institutional review board informed consent, whether it was applicable or not. If it was with an assent at a certain age, and our own IRB changes their assent depending on the study. So you guys know what that means. It's where a child who is above sometimes 6, sometimes 8, sometimes 11, it keeps changing. You just ask your IRB, then the child as well gives the okay for them to proceed. And then the parents, until the child is 18 and above, also sign the consent. If your study involves animal subjects, then you want to start with a statement about the approval from the IARCOC and the appropriate review board and so on. This is a section where people say if you use the reagent, they want to know the name and the company and the city. If you used any other methods, it goes in here. In the same section, you also want to define your groups, treatment groups or controls. This is the place you want to define it. You don't want to leave that to the results, because by the time they read to the results, they should have understood totally your approach. I like to add, and this is a style thing, a biostatistical method in every method section. So I usually do my methods for the research study, and then I keep a separate section within the materials and methods, and I explain my biostatistical approach and statistical analysis. And I usually ask my biostatistician or a biostatistical group to help me go over it to make sure that we really included all the methods that we used. Any questions there? This is a very important section to be covered in a thorough manner.
I have a quick question, maybe only really applies to kind of maybe smaller groups, but for me in fellowship, we only recently had a biostatistician join our group. But when you don't have access to a biostatistician, do you recommend, and maybe you and your mentor want to reach out to someone else, are there like biostatisticians that you would recommend like contracting with, or kind of how do you approach that and make sure what you're presenting and that your stats are correct? And
Absolutely. No, I totally agree. We're physicians, clinicians, scientists. While we have the background to know how to run our stats, we may not be fully comfortable. And honestly, the bigger the topic, the bigger the data sets, you definitely need to have somebody with the expertise help you. So I would say the short answer is institutional specific. So I trained in a place where we had to hire within the university someone, and they charged us per hour, and they're not cheap. This is the place where if you have funding, internal or external, you put aside some money for your biostatistician. And it's about $80 to $100 an hour that they charge. And then you have other models where I'm going to say about two other models where your institution has somebody who belongs to the division, or maybe their division, if we're within GI or surgery, they contract with certain biostatisticians for part of their time. The third model is really where you can, there are free programs and there are fee for using them. So SAS, PRISM are programs where you need some training. I would say PRISM doesn't need any training if you know how to play with Excel. It's not cheap though. I mean, when I was a fellow, I used it and it was about $450 a year. But I ran my own data and stats and made the graphs. And it really tells you if you have 3 groups, you need to run the ANOVA testing. And it's just it's a very nice way to feel like you own it and you do it, but it's expensive. There are other programs that are free. So if people are interested in learning the methodology of the biostatistics, I'm happy to chat more offline about it. But there are R programs, and the R is a very code dependent. Actually, people look up on the internet how to run the code to run statistics between groups and run a scatter plot, and maybe even taking a course into introduction into R or something like that. If you really don't have access to a biostatistician, I would definitely advocate for it. Does that answer your question, Pua?
Yes, thank you very much.
So as you see, like there's not a perfect recipe for everybody, but it would be more tailored to what you have as your resources available. Now I'd like to cover the results section, which is also the other most important section of your paper. It's really where you say what you found. And when I'm working with the fellows, always our first paper together, it's usually like a long-term relationship, because once we find out what works for both of us, we continue writing together. It's always great to experiment with the first project. And it's us as human beings, we tend to put more than just what we found in there. We say, and we were interested and we were surprised by findings. Like, no, leave that out of results. Results is where you state group A and B had these demographics and they differed in XYZ. And I would just make it follow how your methods are. So if you said we started by picking up our cohort, then please start your results by describing your cohort. So first of all, how it's the common sense of flowing, right? So you describe your population, how many subjects, how many protocol failures you had. Really, your table 1 in any manuscript should be your demographics of that group. And then you could do demographics of the individual groups and just have them all in one big table. Use summaries as much as you can and less text. And I use that even in my PowerPoints and my slides. I like to use a lot of visuals. It helps convey your message so much better. Sometimes you can make the figures yourself by using some kind of animated things on PowerPoint and then cut and paste into your paper. Whenever you have the option, figures are really preferred because, again, they convey the message and they are easier to read than tables. And I would say in any manuscript, if you are going to put tables, make sure if you are coding another paper, do not take a table or a figure from any other paper, because all of those previously published ones are copyrighted. If you found that you're writing, let's say, a literature review and you have to put something from a previous paper, always summarize your own tables. And I tell that to even faculty and attending, and sometimes it's amazing how much we miss. Through NASPGHAN, for instance, as an example, we are doing a lot of projects simultaneously where we have to dig and review the literature. While it's not studies, you find yourself needing to extrapolate from other papers. Always make your new figures and tables, and the data should be different. So,
Maisam, can I ask a quick question about the figures and tables?
Absolutely.
Hey, So, one of the things that I've run into in writing results sections has been the sort of fine balance between avoiding redundancy with what's being shown in the figures and what's being written, while still sort of conveying what the most important information is.
Yeah.
I have a tendency to want to put the most important stuff in a nice figure because that's what stands out when someone's like reading through it. But then I also tend to want to sort of have the written part contain the most important information. I don't want it to be redundant because you have such limited space.
Right. And you definitely, Addie, don't want to repeat. You're exactly right. You don't want to repeat what's in your table or figure in your text. But how would I say that in the text? Like, let's say I want to say, let's say we have a demographic table, right? And within the demographic table, we have 100 children with this disease, and there's group A and group B, and maybe they're similar in everything. So I would just make my result one sentence. And I would say, our cohort included 100 children with the disease with, group A having that many subject, group B having many subject. The groups were similar. This is the message that you're conveying. Let's say there was one difference. I would put that in the line and leave everything else as shown in table 1. Does that sound? I mean, that's what the editors want to see. And when we write a lot of what's in the table, they actually make us take it out.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So then you described your population, you go to what is the second most important part of the results. It's really focusing on your aim. This is, if you had a primary outcome that you want to measure, this is the place to put it next. And then after that, you could have different subsections if you had sub-analyses or secondary outcomes. Again, I would make sure that your figures and tables follow the same order. If they are online, for instance, only, let's say a journal gives you, this is a perfect example. Let's say a journal gives you a maximum of 4 tables and figures, but you really, really have a lot of cool data and they're very relevant and they're going to give you a higher impact. Let's say you have 7 tables, but the journal limits to 4. First of all, we all love our research like they're our own kids. We don't want to give away anything and throw it in the trash. So then you could try to make it supplemental. You can consolidate. That's another way to do it too. And I found that especially the ones between us guys, the journals that charge a lot of money for colored figures, I've been consolidating, and that's been a successful approach too. So like I would make it figure 1 is the histopathology. So A is the histopathology, B is the image, C is blah, blah, blah. And I call it all figure 1. Any questions about the results 2 section? Again, to the tables and figures, please follow the journal format, and each journal has a specific format. And then sometimes they want you to put them within the body of the text, and sometimes they want you to upload them as separate folders. We absolutely have to follow that. Otherwise, the paper will be rejected at the editorial board, which would be sad after all the work. Each should have a number. Each figure and table should have a title. Your tables don't have to have a legend. I would say if you have a statistical method, though, that are relevant to that table, I would put it in a smaller font under it. So let's say you used, a t-test for comparing the groups, and or maybe you had proportions, so you had a certain methodology applied. So I would put that. And then each figure, though, needs a figure legend. And I just worked with a fellow, and her paper got submitted and accepted. And then after it was almost online, the editor said, can you please provide legends for figure 1, 2, 3, 4? And we're like, oh, shoot. Well, thank God you accepted it. Another journal would not have done that. So we now submitted the legends. But it's absolutely important because the legend should just summarize. Again, it's like the main 2 points or 1 point that you found from this figure. It doesn't have to be very descriptive because you could put more description in your results. I'm done with the results unless there are any more questions about it. Okay, so moving on to the discussion, and the discussion is really an art, and once you've written one, it becomes easier to write another one. But I like what I learned in my first paper, really, and that one was a science paper, but I wrote like a 5-page discussion, and my mentor was like, "What are you trying to do?" I wanted to cover everything on this topic in the past, in the present, and the future. And really that's what you're trying to do in the discussion, but in a very succinct manner. So I would always say, what is the brief description and the main finding from your study that should put it at the forefront to be considered for publication for this journal? So if you found something for the first time, you put, our study is novel because we show for the first time. If it's something that was replicating another finding, but it's a separate cohort, I would say that. The following would be something about the rationale for your study methodology. And you know, you chose your methodology for a reason. Maybe you wanted to have a retrospective chart review prior to, so that you add to the knowledge, and that would inform future prospective studies. You want to have a totally full paragraph or two about your data and how it relates to previously published data, whether there are similarities, whether there are differences. And if we are in the pediatric field, you have to relate to the adults, and they don't do that when they do pediatric adult studies, but somehow we get a lot of adult reviewers who say, well, so what? It was done before. And you're like, wait, we're not talking about Apache and Glasgow scoring. We're really talking about pediatrics. We cannot apply age above 55 as a criteria. So I would make some of the kind of similarities and differences very evident right there. If there was a study that showed that your lipase elevation is a severity predictor and it's very similar, you put that in there. But you show what is the difference between that and your study. Is it that the timeline was different? Is it that you have a bigger cohort and you validated it? Whatever it is, people want to know how it relates. Then I always like, before I conclude, to just draw people's attentions to the limitations. And that answers Chris' questions as well. If you found that because it's a retrospective chart review, there were some data sets that are not available, that's totally fine. If you think the limitation is by how we found the cohort because it's billing data, we all know the limitations of billing, and so on. I would say if we didn't have labs for the patients, but we only had chief complaints, I would say that is a limitation, and so on. And then you finish with a 1 paragraph that talks about, in conclusion, the main point or two from your study. And then you also finish with 1 sentence about where do you think the future directions of your work or other colleagues should go. Very important to kind of put things into perspective and close the paper. But at the same time, some people really, and when I review papers, this is the section I pick on a lot. I always say trim, cut. Just cut it. Because it makes people, it sometimes dilutes from the main point. Questions about your discussion? So we covered that. And the last thing is really do not overinterpret. And here is the place if you wanted to put, and we were surprised to find XYZ. This is the place to put it, actually, in the discussion. I wouldn't put it in the results. But you also put kind of your own explanation of why you thought. Some speculation is okay. That's what tinkers the system, and that's what keeps us moving. I wouldn't overinterpret my data. I wouldn't say if there is a retrospective study that shows that the group that had this disease were smokers compared to the group that didn't have the disease were not smokers. I wouldn't say that smoking caused the disease. This is where you cannot overinterpret. This is where I would say associated with. And a lot of times it's really kind of really how you polish your results, because you might really be thinking that you don't mean that smoking caused it because you didn't go to the lab and prove it. But at the same time, it's really how you convey the message, and it just makes the paper go faster from 1 or 2 reviews. And we're always lucky if we get our papers from 1 or 2 reviews. I would like to cover authorships because that's a very touchy field, and we all in academic thrive by it. I would always say the most accepted authorship guidelines have been published by the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors. And this is a group that met in the 1978, and they published what are the guidelines for who should be and who shouldn't be an author. So I'm going to read them, and then I would like to get your input, guys, on any situations that you feel are tricky. So these requirements say that, number 1, the author should have had substantial contribution to the conception and design and acquisition of the data, or analysis and interpretation of the data. So that could be the person who collected the data. That could be your biostatistician who did the kind of participate with you and kind of going over the design and then the analysis and interpretation. Number 2, drafting the article or revising it critically for important intellectual content. Number 3 is final approval of the version to be published. The authors in each author, whether you have 3 authors or 17 or 70, there's a consensus statement we're doing has 70, each author should fulfill number 1 and 2 and 3. If they really participated in 1 and 2 and they have not given you the approval, you are stuck to tell them you have a timeline or you're out. Because the last thing you want is somebody saying, I didn't approve it, and this paper is out there, and then having you pull it. Also, people should not ask to be authors if they did not fulfill this top 3 or the required 3. And we find sometimes that as people are more senior in the field, they tend, and not everybody, but we all have been in these situations that they can get, how do I say it? What's the term? Help me out, guys, here. There is something called, it's not really senior authorship. I don't know how to say it. It's like their privilege because of their seniority. And there is really no such thing in academic. Acquisition of funding, collection of data, or general supervision of a research group alone. So if your mentor just supervised, they cannot be just an author, even your mentor. It's really participating in every step. And then managing a patient in a clinical setting. Let's say my patient has been enrolled with Addie in a study at UCSF. That does not qualify me to be a co-author, because having seen the patient, even if she used my note to get her retrospective data, I am not an author on a project when I did not fulfill the 3 criteria that we mentioned. So any questions about the authorships or comments or examples that you guys need help with?
Yeah, this is Pua. Yeah, I'm glad that you brought this up because, you know, especially those of us that are training, I'm a fellow and I know we have residents and medical students too. We may feel like, you know, we put in a lot of work and someone who maybe is senior but not our mentor kind of steps in and says, oh, well, you know, when I was a trainee, I started this database, so my name should be on the paper as well. And that did happen to me, but I think it really goes to show how good of a mentor you have chosen for yourself, because my mentor stepped in immediately and said, you started the database, but you didn't, you know, put in the effort and you weren't a part of any of the drafts. So, you know, we'll not be putting your name on the paper. And I think it helps to have someone senior and you choose a mentor that's really going to stand behind you. So I'm glad that you brought that up.
Absolutely. It's something we all have been in academics. It's a constant discussion. Kia, did you want to say something? I see that you're unmuted. Okay. Anybody else has any other comments? That's really all I had for slides.
I have a question. We talked a lot about manuscripts and data in that aspect, but I'm wondering, like, what's your favorite method of presenting your data, whether it's in posters and manuscripts or actually in presentations?
So I think I really strive to make every project I have as a paper. So if I felt that putting together an abstract is going to distract me from the goal of putting a paper, then I wouldn't do it. I love presenting my abstract when I'm very, very solid about my data too, because that is the interaction of scientific meetings. This is how you grow your collaborators. You present it, whether it's a poster or an oral presentation, and you either grow your collaborators or you get critiqued in a good way, and then you tweak your methods when you go back and make even your research better. So I have to say that I always encourage my fellows to present, but again, it's that kind of really slippery slope. I have a fellow who wants to write 20 abstracts a year, and I say, no, you got to finish your 2 papers first. And that's really to their best interest, because it's exciting to go to meetings and present abstracts. It's really the balance, poets. So what do I prefer? I like all of them. I really, really do. I think it adds to your academic productivity and portfolio. We don't get to choose oral versus poster. I think in every submission, whether it's DDW or others, you get to choose if you want to be considered for an oral. I usually say yes, while it's might be, anxiety provoking for some of us to be on the podium. This is really the way that you could be out there, and you want to be out there whenever you get the chance. Like, I know a lot of you guys on this group from different meetings, and this is the beauty of being out there and presenting your work.
Okay, great. Are there any other questions or comments or thoughts? Okay, well, thank you very much, Maisam, for a really great presentation. I know I took a lot of notes, and the main thing I'm taking away from this absolutely is starting my manuscript before the meeting, because I think we fall into the same, where we have a lot of abstracts being produced, but you get it submitted, and then you kind of like, whew, okay, I got some time, we'll get the poster together, but really taking the time to just sit down and get your first draft ready to go before the conference even starts. It's a great tip. So thank you again for everything.
Well, thank you guys for your time and listening, and I'm happy to kind of take, emails or calls. You guys know how to find me. So I'm very, very excited for this group and all the great work that you and Venkata and Caper, this really Caper Scholars programs are fantastic. So thank you for considering me too.
Okay, great, thanks.